When we think of Cristiano Ronaldo today, we basically picture this borderline immortal figure in the world of sports, right? We're talking 5 Ballon d'Or awards, 5 Champions League titles, and a guy who is literally the all-time leading goal scorer in the history of professional football. We see this athlete who's essentially sculpted from granite, famous for a rigorous, almost robotic dedication to physical perfection. But to truly understand the relentless engine that drives this icon, we actually have to rewind all the way back to the year 2000. Today, we're going to unpack how a terrifying medical scare almost ended a sporting legend's career before it even had the chance to begin, and how a moment of profound vulnerability ultimately forged an absolutely unbreakable will.
15. Think about that for a second. At just 15 years old, Cristiano Ronaldo wasn't just another kid playing football. He had left his entire family behind on the small island of Madeira to move to Portugal's capital, Lisbon. So he's this skinny teenager dealing with intense homesickness, but on the pitch, he was an absolute phenomenon. He was already the undisputed crown jewel of the Sporting CP Youth Academy. Just imagine the sheer weight of expectation resting on the shoulders of someone who is, essentially, the age of a high school sophomore. He was a boy carrying the hopes of his parents, the massive financial investments of a legendary football club, all while just trying to navigate the messy complexities of growing up hundreds of miles away from home.
Section 1. The Crown Jewel, a prodigy on the fast track. Even at this young age, his footwork was noticeably sharper and way more daring than anyone else on the pitch. Scouts and coaches were already whispering his name in the corridors of European football. His acceleration was absolutely lethal, and his ambition simply unmatched by his peers. He'd be the one staying late after training, constantly grinding on his dribbling and free kicks. If you were watching him back then, you were looking at a boy who was quite literally living on the fast track to professional stardom. He was flying up through the age brackets with blistering speed, and everything was going perfectly, 100% according to plan.
But destiny has a kind of cruel way of testing the strongest wills. Sitting completely still, his heart was pounding like a frantic drum. And the craziest part? This deeply alarming discovery didn't even happen during a grueling match or some exhausting sprint in the summer heat. It happened during what was supposed to be a completely routine, totally mundane medical screening by the sporting staff. Just a doctor with a stethoscope listening to a 15-year-old boy's chest who suddenly realized that something was incredibly wrong. In that cold, quiet examination room, the blistering pace of Cristiano's rise came to a sudden, screeching halt.
Part 2. The Frantic Drum. A diagnosis that changes everything. In literally a single moment, the entire trajectory of his life shifted. Everything he had worked for, all those countless hours on the training pitch, the painful sacrifices of moving away from his family, it all suddenly sat right on the very edge of total ruin. The diagnosis was tachycardia. That's a condition where the heart rate drastically exceeds the normal resting rate. Think of the human heart like a car engine. For an elite athlete, especially someone playing a high-intensity cardiovascular sport like professional football, where players are regularly running over 10 kilometers a match, the heart needs to be perfectly tuned. If your resting heart rate is already revving like a race car at a red light, pushing it to maximum exertion during a sprint could cause the whole engine to completely blow out. We're talking sudden cardiac arrest, right there on the grass. Because his entire livelihood depended on absolute peak cardiovascular endurance, this diagnosis was pretty much a potential death sentence for his career. Obviously, this news hit the Aveiro family like a thunderbolt, carrying a massive emotional toll. Back home in Madeira, his mother, Maria Dolores, practically collapsed in tears when she heard from the club doctors. She had already scrubbed floors, cooked, and sacrificed almost everything she had just to afford to send her boy to Lisbon to pursue this dream. And for Cristiano himself, the stakes were just as monumental. His life, his dreams, they hung in this fragile, terrifying balance. Without football, he felt he had absolutely no identity. There was no backup plan. The terror in that moment wasn't just physical. It was deeply, deeply existential. Part 3. A delicate solution. The high-stakes laser surgery. The medical team made the reality of the situation painfully clear to them. Because Cristiano's heart was racing so fast without any exertion, simply taking it easy for a few months just wouldn't fix the underlying electrical problem. Training at high intensity was a ticking time bomb. There was only one highly sophisticated, incredibly delicate option available: high-stakes laser surgery. The doctors laid out the procedure, and it is honestly terrifying. Step 1, they would have to enter his body with a catheter through a vein.
Step 2. They had to carefully navigate that catheter all the way up to the heart to pinpoint the exact bundle of tissue causing those abnormal electrical impulses. Step 3. They'd use a laser to cauterize, or basically burn away, that specific rogue pathway. The risks here were intensely real. You are actively operating on the heart of a 15-year-old boy. 1 millimeter off and his life is altered forever. But remember, the alternative was giving up football forever, and for Cristiano, that was absolutely never an option.
Dolores rushed from the island of Madeira to Lisbon just to be by his side. Her hands were physically shaking as she signed the medical authorization forms at the hospital. But despite the undeniable underlying terror of being a 15-year-old facing heart surgery, Cristiano tried so hard to stay strong for his mom. He looked right at her in that hospital room and promised, "I will be back on the pitch in no time." It takes an incredible amount of maturity and just raw bravery to offer that kind of comfort while facing your own mortality. With that promise hanging in the air, he was wheeled into the operating room.
While his family stood anxiously in the waiting room, just praying, the surgeons meticulously navigated the delicate pathways of a heart that would, eventually, power one of the greatest athletes in human history. They found the problematic tissue, they applied the laser, and thankfully, the operation was a resounding success. That irregular electrical pathway causing his heart to race was completely and successfully closed. But honestly, what happened next is easily the most shocking and defining part of this entire story.
Part 4. Faster and stronger, an unimaginable resilience. What absolutely stunned the doctors and the sporting coaching staff wasn't just that the medical procedure worked. That was a huge relief, sure. But what truly shocked them was how Cristiano's body and mind aggressively responded to the trauma of the surgery itself.
His timeline of recovery was almost unbelievable. Normally, a procedure involving the heart requires patients to undergo weeks of complete rest, plus incredibly careful monitoring before even considering a return to mild physical exertion. But for Cristiano, that morning, laser heart surgery. Mere days later, he's discharged from the hospital, up and completely back on his feet. A few days after that, he literally walked back onto the sporting CP training grounds. Driven by this almost superhuman obsession to get back to the grass, he wasn't just walking, he was actively itching to run. He simply could not be kept away from the ball.
Section 5. The drive for greatness, a secret limitation removed. When the medical staff and coaches finally, and reluctantly, allowed him back into light training, they were holding their breath. They were watching his every single move, terrified his heart might falter right there on the grass during a sprint. But actually, the exact opposite happened. The underlying physical limitation that had secretly been draining his stamina and holding him back all those years, it was completely gone.
When he got back out on the pitch, he didn't just return to normal. He actually looked remarkably stronger, noticeably faster, and just lighter on his feet than he did before the surgery. His engine was finally unlocked. But more importantly, a profound psychological shift had occurred. He now trained with this added layer of sheer desperation. He became fully, acutely aware of how incredibly close he had come to losing everything he loved. This terrifying medical scare didn't break him. Instead, it forged his greatest superpower. It gave him the realization that his time in the sport was a fragile gift, and he absolutely refused to waste a single second of his potential on his path to greatness. This is the exact moment that birthed the relentless, obsessive work ethic Ronaldo is famous for today.
Cristiano realized at 15 that his time on the pitch was a fragile gift that could be snatched away at any random medical exam. It completely rewired how he approached his craft. So it really makes you think, doesn't it? If you almost lost your greatest passion tomorrow, how would you spend today? Thank you so much for joining me.